Let's dive in, shall we? Today, we're tackling Exodus chapter 40.
Exodus 40.
Yeah, we're going deep into the heart of the wilderness, right alongside the Israelites.
Right.
But this isn't just any camping trip. This is about the Tabernacle,
Yeah.
God's dwelling place, right there with them, every step of the way.
And you know what strikes me every time I read this chapter is just how incredibly detailed, how precise God is with Moses about the construction.
It's like, talk about micromanaging, right?
Right.
But I guess when you're building a house for God, there's no room for, oh, I just eyeballed it.
Exactly. You're not throwing up a tent in the backyard. This is the tabernacle, the place where God's presence is going to reside among his people.
So holiness matters.
Holiness matters.
Everything's got to be just so. And the text really goes into it, doesn't it? I mean, we're talking about the Ark of the Testimony, the veil, the table, the candlestick, even down to the courtyard gate.
You know, every single detail is important. It's not just functionality here.
Right, right. It's about something bigger.
It's packed with symbolism. Think about the Ark, for instance, holding the Ten Commandments, the very heart of God's covenant with his people.
It's like, hey, remember that agreement we made? Kind of a visual reminder right there in the center.
Exactly. And the veil, separating the Holy of Holies, where God's presence dwelled, from the rest of the tabernacle. It's a powerful visual representation of the reverence and awe that surrounds approaching the divine.
It's like a physical embodiment of the idea that not just anyone can waltz into God's presence.
Yeah.
There's a process, a respect, a sense of awe.
And then woven through the entire chapter, this idea of holiness. It's not just about the objects themselves.
We're talking about that anointing thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The anointing, the tabernacle, the furnishings, the priests, all set apart by being anointed with oil.
And so what's the big deal with the oil? I mean, is it like some magic potion?
No. Think of it more like a symbolic act of consecration, transforming something ordinary into something extraordinary, setting it apart for a sacred purpose.
Like elevating it,
Yeah.
like making it holy.
Precisely. It's like the difference between, say, a simple meal and a communion meal.
Okay, I see. So the act changes the meaning.
Exactly. The same elements, but completely different significance.
That makes sense. But honestly, why all this focus on physical stuff? The objects, the rituals? Couldn't God's presence just be anywhere? Why all the fuss about a tent?
Well, remember, the Israelites were fresh out of slavery, just starting this crazy journey through the wilderness.
Right, they needed something solid, something they could actually see and touch.
Exactly. They needed tangible reminders of God's covenant, his presence, his guidance. This portable sanctuary, the tabernacle, became a place where they could actually experience the divine.
A place to connect with God, right there in the middle of nowhere.
And constructing it, it was a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Exodus 40 lays it all out, step by step, from raising the framework to putting in every piece of furniture.
Talk about an IKEA project from God himself.
And you can just imagine the feeling, right? Building this place piece by piece where God's presence would dwell among them.
Must have been pretty intense.
And then the moment it was all complete, absolutely extraordinary.
What happened?
Picture this. They finished the tabernacle, everything's in its place, and then this cloud descends, covering the tent of meeting, and God's glory just fills the tabernacle.
Oh, talk about a housewarming party.
It was a visible manifestation of God's presence, not just some random weather event. This was the real deal.
A powerful statement, like, I'm here, I'm with you.
Absolutely. It was a confirmation that God had chosen to dwell among his people.
So what do you think that moment meant to those who were there? I mean, after all that work, all that meticulous building, and then boom.
I think it must have been a validation of their faith and their obedience, a moment of awe and wonder, but also, it marked the beginning of a new phase in their journey. They were going to be guided by this extraordinary cloud.
Wait, guided? Like literally?
Literally. It became their compass. When the cloud lifted, they packed up and followed.
No map, no GPS, just follow the cloud.
Exactly. A constant, visible reminder of God's presence and leadership.
That's wild. Imagine putting all your trust in a cloud.
It takes a huge leap of faith, doesn't it? To trust in a guidance you can't fully understand.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about trusting in something bigger than yourself, even when it doesn't make sense.
And you know, even though we might not have a literal cloud guiding us today, that challenge of trusting in a higher power, surrendering to a path that's unfolding before us, It's something we all still grapple with, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, whether it's a career change, a relationship, or just figuring out what's next in life, we're all looking for that sense of direction, that inner compass.
That's so true. And sometimes, we might feel lost, questioning, wondering when things will finally start moving in the right direction.
Right. And then we start doubting everything like, am I even on the right path here?
It's completely natural to feel that way. But maybe there's something to be said for those moments of stillness, those times when the cloud seems to be standing still.
Yeah, I think so.
What if we saw those times not as setbacks, but as opportunities? A chance to go deeper, to reflect, maybe to just surrender to the fact that we don't have all the answers.
Okay, yeah. So like instead of freaking out when things aren't moving,
hmm
maybe we should just breathe and trust.
Trust in God's timing. Trust that even when we don't understand why things are happening the way they are, there's a purpose unfolding.
Yeah.
Just like with the Israelites in the cloud.
It's a beautiful concept,
Yeah,
but definitely challenging too.
absolutely. Surrendering to a journey you can't fully control. Trusting in a plan that's bigger than your own limited understanding. That's a lifelong lesson, isn't it?
It is, and it's definitely something to keep in mind as we continue our deep dive into Exodus 40. But before we do that, let's take a closer look at another detail from this chapter, a detail that I think sheds even more light on the nature of God's presence in the tabernacle.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so we've got this incredible structure. They built it, they consecrated it with oil, and now God's presence is so strong, it's literally visible, like a cloud guiding their every move. What else is there to uncover in this chapter of Exodus?
Well, there's this one detail that always gets me. Right after they finish the tabernacle and that glorious cloud fills the tent, the text tells us that Moses couldn't go in.
Wait, what? Moses couldn't enter, but he's the one who spoke with God, the one who got all these instructions.
I know, right? And that's what's so amazing about this moment. The text actually says it was because the cloud of God's presence was so powerful, so intensely holy, that even Moses couldn't handle being in its full presence.
Wow, that is intense. It really makes you grasp just how immense, how powerful the God they were encountering truly was.
Doesn't it? We're talking about the same God who spoke to Moses face to face, the God who freed them from slavery. But even Moses had to acknowledge how totally beyond us God really is.
It's almost like a paradox, isn't it? On the one hand, you've got this awe-inspiring, maybe even a little bit scary power. But at the same time, you have this incredible closeness, this intimacy, because God has chosen to live among his people.
It really is. That tension between God being beyond us and God being with us is at the heart of this whole tabernacle idea.
Makes you wonder what that experience must have been like for the Israelites. To know that this incredibly powerful God was journeying with them, guiding them. It must have been terrifying and comforting all at once.
I think you're right. And that tension you mentioned between awe and intimacy, that's something we still feel today, don't you think? When we try to wrap our minds around the universe, the mysteries of life and death, we experience awe, maybe a little fear even.
But then when we feel deeply connected to something, when we feel love or experience something spiritual, it's like we get a glimpse of that same divine presence, but in a more personal, intimate way.
It's like the same God who fills us with wonder is also the God who comforts us, who guides us through the tough times, who celebrates with us when we're joyful.
You know, this conversation is making me think about that, saying, the journey is the destination. It seems like for the Israelites, building the tabernacle wasn't just about making a physical structure, was it? It was about encountering the divine, learning to walk with God every step of the way, literally, tent pole by tent pole.
You've got it. And that's a really powerful lesson for us today, isn't it? We might not be physically building a tabernacle, but we are each on our own journeys of building a relationship with God, with something bigger than ourselves.
So what are those tent poles in our lives, the things we need to put in place to help our spirits grow? Are we talking about things like prayer, meditation, spending time in nature, helping others?
Those are all fantastic examples, and it might be different for everyone. The important thing, I think, is being intentional about it, making a conscious effort to create space for what's sacred in our lives.
Right. It's about making those moments, whether they're physical places or just times in our day, where we can step away from the busyness and noise and connect with something deeper.
You said it. And we can learn from the care and detail that the Israelites put into building and taking care of the tabernacle. It wasn't just a building, it was a holy place, a real representation of their promise with God.
And talking about that promise, that cloud became a symbol of it too, didn't it? It wasn't just leading them around, it was guiding their spirits too.
Absolutely. That cloud was a visible reminder of God's promise to be with them, to lead them, to keep them safe. It was like a physical embodiment of their relationship with God.
Thinking about the Israelites following that cloud, I can't help but wonder about our own experiences when we're looking for guidance. Have you ever felt like you were following a cloud, so to speak? A
Okay.
time when you were inexplicably pulled toward a certain path or a decision, even if it didn't make sense at the time?
What a fascinating question. And you know what? It reminds me of something else the text says about that cloud. Something that adds another layer to this idea of trusting in something when you don't fully get it.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. You've got to tell me more.
Yeah.
So you were saying there's something else about the cloud that makes this idea of trusting in guidance even more interesting.
Right. So we have this cloud. It's the symbol of God's presence leading them through the wilderness. But get this, it didn't always move. The text actually says that sometimes the cloud would just stay put, sometimes for days, sometimes even longer.
Oh, wow. I hadn't really thought about that. But it makes sense, I guess. They weren't exactly on a tight schedule. They must have needed to stop sometimes, to
Oh,
rest, regroup.
exactly. And I think there's a pretty deep lesson for us in that too. We often think about following God's guidance as this constant moving forward, always making progress. But what about those times when the cloud doesn't seem to be going anywhere? What about those periods in life where we feel stuck, uncertain, maybe even frustrated?
I definitely know that feeling, like I'm just going in circles, waiting for something to happen. Do you think the Israelites ever felt that way? When the cloud just lingered, like, come on, already.
Well, the text doesn't say specifically how they reacted, but it's something to consider. Put yourself in their shoes. Imagine seeing the awesome power of God, packing up and moving all the time, following that cloud, and then suddenly it just stops. How would you feel?
Hmm, I'm honest. I think I'd probably start getting impatient. Maybe even a little doubtful. Where are we going? What's the holdup?
Yeah.
I might even wonder if I've been on the wrong path all along.
It's human nature, right? To question, to worry. But what if we saw those moments of stillness as opportunities? What if instead of panicking, we took a breath and just trusted?
Trusted. But trusted what? When you don't even know what's going on or where you're headed.
Trusted in God's timing. Trusting that there's a purpose even when we can't see it. Just like the Israelites had to learn to trust the cloud, even when it led them somewhere unexpected, or even when it seemed to be taking a break. We have to cultivate that same trust in something bigger than ourselves.
It's a beautiful idea, that's for sure. But man, it's a hard one to put into practice.
You're telling me surrendering to a journey you can't control, trusting in a plan that's beyond you, that's a lesson we keep learning our whole lives, I think.
That's so true. And it's definitely something to remember as we think about everything we've talked about today, all the details of the tabernacle, the cloud, and what it all meant for the Israelites.
It's not just an old story, is it? It's a reminder for us today to be intentional about our spiritual lives, to create a space for what's sacred, whether it's a physical place or just a space in our hearts, and to trust that there's a guidance that's bigger than what we can see right in front of us.
Those are some pretty powerful takeaways. I know I'm walking away with a lot to think about. What about you? What do you hope our listeners will take away from our deep dive into Exodus 40?
You know, I hope they realize that this story of the tabernacle is more than just an ancient history lesson. I hope they see it as a timeless call to create space for the sacred in their own lives and to trust in a guidance that goes beyond what they think they understand.
That's beautifully said. It's amazing to consider what the Israelites experienced. To see God's presence so clearly, to be led by a cloud, to build a home for the divine. It must have been incredible and humbling all at once.
It really must have been. And that feeling of awe, of realizing there's something so much greater than ourselves, we can still experience that today, even without a physical tabernacle or a cloud to follow.
It's about paying attention,
Yeah.
right? Noticing the wonder in the world around us, the everyday miracles, feeling a sense of reverence for life itself.
And maybe, just maybe, if we're paying close enough attention, we'll start to see our own clouds guiding us. Those little nudges, those moments of clarity that lead us towards a deeper connection with ourselves and something beyond ourselves.
Well, this has been an incredible journey through Exodus 40. Thank you so much for leading the way.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, we'll leave you with this. What are the tent poles in your life? Where do you find that sense of the sacred? And what guidance are you trusting, even when the path seems unclear? We hope you'll keep pondering these questions and exploring the wisdom found in these ancient texts.